Now I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but PC gaming on Android is now a thing. And when I say it's a thing, I mean it's not a gimmick. I'm not talking playing games like Pac-Man or Minesweeper or Solitaire, although that would be cool, I suppose. These are actual, real 3D games from my Steam library running on my Google Pixel 10 Pro. This is all thanks to an app called GameNative, and it allows you to integrate your Steam library, your GOG library, Epic Games library, Amazon, and even add custom games and run them using Wine and Proton, which is a similar method to what the Steam Deck does, on your Android phone, and it's just unbelievable. It supports offline mode, it integrates with your libraries, it has artwork, it tells you how long you've played for, it's got how long to beat built in. I mean, this is in its early days, but it's starting to really feel like a polished project, especially on the front end. Now, I've tested 5 or 6 games with this, and these are actual games from my Steam library that I'd love to be able to take out and about with me when I don't have my Steam Deck and when I'm just on a long flight and just want to do some proper gaming, not a typical mobile game. I want something that I can get really stuck into when I'm out and about, and now I can do that, and my mind is absolutely blown. Now let's just set some realistic expectations here. Now you're not going to be playing something like Cyberpunk on ultra settings on your Pixel 10. Maybe one day we'll get to that point. But you are genuinely going to be able to play some real PC games on the go, and I'm all for it. Now, I have got full gameplay videos of all of the titles that I've tested here, so if you check out my channel, you'll be able to see them on there if you want to see extended clips. I've also documented all the settings over on my website, nerdsap.com, and I've even uploaded the config files for the individual games I'm about to show you, which means you guys can just download those, apply them to your game, and you won't have to go through the faffage that I went through to get it up and running. So let's have a look, starting with Tomb Raider. Now, this game is from 2013, but I still think it looks pretty incredible. Now, I had this running anywhere between 40 and 50 frames per second, which I think is pretty impressive, but I find actually capping the game at 40 frames per second gave me the most reliable performance. That's also going to help with battery life as well, which if you enable the overlay for performance on GameNative, then it's going to tell you how much battery life you've got left as well. I actually find that to be the case with all the games I mentioned here. I capped pretty much all of them at 40 FPS because when you're playing on mobile, that's absolutely fine, and you're just going to want that right balance between them. Now, I actually managed to install lossless scaling from Steam as well for frame generation. Now, in the app, it does actually say it's only supported by certain devices, and it doesn't mention the processor that's in the Pixel. However, I did find it let me enable it, and it actually worked. Results for this were kind of mixed, and actually I left it turned off on most of the games other than Ni no Kuni, which I'll show you at the end. As for settings, I set this to the lowest setting, and I actually set the resolution to the lowest it would let me set, which is 540p. And I know that sounds absolutely terrible, but when you're playing something like this on a mobile phone, it looks amazing. It still looks better than any other mobile phone game that you've actually played. And when you enable the DLSS scaling option, which is built in, it's actually going to look nice and crisp and run really smoothly on your phone. And what more could you want? I also ran Skyrim Special Edition. This ran pretty well. This ran at 720p. Frame rate was somewhere between 20 and low 30s, which granted isn't great, but it is definitely playable, and the fact that you can play Skyrim on the go is just unbelievable. Now, perhaps I might have been better installing the original Skyrim here, not the Special Edition. Maybe that would have got a little bit more performance out of the Pixel, but as you can see here, it's running perfectly fine, and this is definitely something that I would sit and play on the go. What a time to be alive. Now, there were definitely some quirks when installing this. I actually found that I had to tweak quite a few settings, and there was also this really strange issue where there was no dialogue, so all the sound was working, all the music was working, but it was like every NPC was a mime, and it was just a really strange place to be. But I found a fix for this. Again, it's documented over on nerdsap.com, so go and have a look at that if you want the deep dive on how to set these things up. When I first found out about GameNative, I just had to try Half-Life 2. The reason is I just knew this would run pretty well with it being such an old game, but it still looks really good in my opinion. And obviously the story in that game, the gameplay, being able to do that on your phone, incredible. So this actually ran flawlessly on the Pixel 10 Pro. I set the frame rate to be locked at 60 FPS. It was running at 720p. I think the settings were default in terms of graphics. I can't actually remember what I set them to, so apologies, but I'm pretty sure they were set as default, and it was running at 720p, locked at 60 FPS, and it's just looked absolutely perfect. I think for a game that doesn't take up that much storage, with it being an older one, this is definitely something worth keeping on your phone, in your pocket, just to go anytime. Now, Fallout 4 was a little bit of a mixed bag. This is obviously quite a demanding game, especially when you're running at through emulation on a Pixel, but I did find it actually worked. Now, sometimes it would hit 60 frames per second, sometimes the lows were around 18 frames per second, so not ideal, but it did run. I ran this at the very lowest settings it would let me set. It was set to 960 by 540 resolution, which again, with the DLSS scaling option enabled, looked absolutely perfect for mobile gaming. I did try to recover some extra frames here by enabling lossless scaling, but I just found that it wasn't worth the trade-off. The input latency was just a little bit too high for me, and even though it was reporting high frame rates, I could still feel that stutter there, so to me it just made sense to leave it off. I would say it's playable, but perhaps something like Fallout 3 would be a more realistic choice here. Now let's move on to Ni no Kuni 2 Revenant Kingdom. Now I think we can all agree that the art style on this game is absolutely stunning. The frame rates came out somewhere between 18 and 30, which doesn't sound great on paper, but if you think that most animations of this style are actually shot at 12 frames per second, it didn't bother me half as much as I thought it would. Now, Ni no Kuni 2 was the one example on this list where I think lossless scaling actually did it some favours. It felt noticeably smoother when enabling that option. Still not perfect, but it felt a lot better. Now, there was some visual quirks in this game, especially with lossless scaling enabled. I did find that some items went transparent a little bit when moving the camera, but also there was this really strange quirk where I couldn't see any of the UI elements on the menu. So I click into the menu, I could see some things there, but the actual menu item names were just not visible. It's workable, you can work out where you're going with this, and I'm sure there's a fix for it somewhere. But yeah, just one of those quirks worth mentioning. I mentioned earlier that if you enable the performance overlay, you get to see the remaining battery life estimation, and this was actually really impressive. So my phone was on around 60% when I was testing this, and most games were quoting almost 3 hours of gameplay left. Now, if I was just to do some quick maths there, that would mean that if my phone was 100%, I'd be getting close to maybe 4 hours or something like that, which would be absolutely incredible if I could run any of these games for 4 hours on my phone. So haven't done any in-depth battery testing, I've not done any sort of proper measurements. That's a bit of finger in the air maths for you there, but it looked good. It wasn't draining the battery, so should be good for long sessions. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I've got a huge backlog of games on my PC. Over 400, I calculated the other day, and because this lets me integrate all of my library, yes, not all of them are going to work perfectly on GameNative, but it does give some of those ones that have sat in the background for a little while a chance to be played at least. So yeah, that's just a really quick look at the GameNative app. Go and check these guys out over on GitHub, give them a star, check out the support options, install the app, provide feedback. They're over on Discord as well, so if you want to join the discussions over there, they're quite eager to hear about how games performed, what settings worked for you, what settings didn't. So yeah, as you can probably tell, I'm really excited about all of this. If you've got any questions you want to ask, just drop them down in the comments. Go and check out nerdsapp.com, and yeah, subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of content, and I'll see you in the next one.